If you're looking at international property, especially somewhere like Thailand, that the whole tax situation can feel, well, pretty confusing.
It really can. Like a maze sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking about the money side of buying and selling real estate there and, how to actually handle those transaction costs that can often, well, trip up investors who aren't local. Okay, let's unpack this. Now, for this deep dive, our information comes from a really solid source. We're using insights from Ocean Worldwide.
Ah, yes. They're very well regarded.
They are a top-tier luxury residential real estate agency, and they specialize in Phuket and Koh Samui.
And it's important we say that right, Phuket.
Absolutely. Phuket, not Phuket, as they pointed out. They've actually been based right there in Phuket since 2004.
Wow, that's a long time. Deep roots.
For sure. And their director, Sandra O'Neill, she's apparently helped thousands of families and investors figure this stuff out over the years. So this isn't just theory, it's, real practical knowledge from the high-end market.
And what's really key, I think, is that even though the whole tax system seems complex, a lot of it boils down to understanding one specific difference.
Okay.
It's the difference between stamp duty and what's called specific business tax, or SBT. If you don't get which one applies, well, that's when you can get a pretty nasty surprise later on.
Right, those unexpected costs.
Exactly. So our goal today is really to give you that clear structure, the actual numbers, the percentages, and the rules, especially around how long you've owned the property and how it's valued.
So you can budget properly.
Precisely. You need to know these fees up front, whether you're eyeing a condo or, say, that THB 122 million villa in Layan, Phuket we looked at.
Okay, absolutely essential. So let's jump right into that main point then, the stamp duty versus the specific business tax. The core idea you're saying is it's one or the other.
That's the fundamental rule. Mutually exclusive. You won't pay both on the same sale.
Got it. One or the other.
And that distinction is huge because the rates are just poles apart.
Yeah.
Let's break them down. First, specific business tax SBT. This is the big one. It's a hefty 3.3%. And that 3.3% actually includes a smaller local tax component, too.
Okay, 3.3%. So when does that get triggered? That seems quite high.
It does, and it applies mainly in two situations. The first, and this is the most common one, is if you sell the property within 5 years of buying it.
The short-term flip deterrent?
Exactly. Or the second situation is if the seller is a company. Doesn't matter how long the company owned it. If it's a corporate seller, boom, 3.3% SBT.
Okay, so less than 5 years ownership, or if a company is selling.
Correct. Hit either of those, and it's a 3.3% SBT.
But if you manage to avoid that, then you fall back to the other one.
Yes, then you fall back to stamp duty. And that's levied at a much more palatable 0.5%.
Okay, 0.5% versus 3.3%. Big difference. So how do I, as a seller, qualify for that lower 0.5% rate?
Well, you qualify if you're exempt from that SBT we just talked about.
Right.
So for an individual seller, not a company, that exemption kicks in mainly in two ways. Either you've owned the property for more than 5 years.
Okay, the 5-year mark again?
Crucial mark.
Yeah.
Or the other way is if you, as an individual seller, have actually used the property as your main home, your primary residence, for at least 1 year.
Okay. So own it over 5 years, or live in it as your main home for at least a year.
That's it. Meet one of those, and you avoid the 3.3% and pay the 0.5% instead. And, on a luxury property, that difference isn't trivial. It can easily be hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of baht.
Oh, yeah.
So that ownership duration is probably the single biggest factor influencing the seller's final tax bill.
That makes that 5-year timeline absolutely critical for anyone selling. Okay, so now we know the rate is either 0.5% or 3.3%. But the next big question is, what value is that percentage applied to?
Yes.
Because here's where it gets really interesting. How do they determine the taxable value?
Right. This is key. The 0.5% stamp duty and actually the 3.3% SBT, too, they're both calculated on whichever value is higher.
Yeah.
The actual sale price you agreed on or the government's own assessed value.
Government's value, what's that called?
It's officially called the cadastral value. Think of it as the government's official appraisal of the property's worth for tax purposes.
Okay, cadastral value, so higher of the actual price or the cadastral value.
Exactly. Let's take that big villa example again, the THB 122 million one. Say the seller agrees to sell it for 120 million baht.
Okay.
But maybe the government's cadastral value is higher.
Right.
Let's say 130 million baht.
Right.
In that case, the tax, whether it's the 0.5% or the 3.3%, gets calculated on 130 million baht, not the 120 million sale price.
So the government always takes the higher number for their calculation.
Always. They base it on the value that benefits the state the most.
Yeah, okay, let me just push on that a bit. If they use that higher value rule for the big 3.3% specific business tax, that really ups the risk, doesn't it? Especially if someone's forced to sell quickly.
Absolutely.
You could get hit not just with the higher rate, but potentially on a higher valuation you didn't even agree to in the sale.
You've nailed it. That's exactly why that cadastral value, the government number, can be such a massive point in negotiations, especially if the seller knows they're facing the 3.3% SBT.
It's like a double whammy.
It is.
Huh.
A high tax rate potentially applied to an artificially high government set value. It's a significant financial risk for the seller.
Right, okay. So that covers the main stamp duty versus SBT calculation. But of course, a real estate transaction has more costs involved than just that one tax.
Oh, definitely.
So if you're budgeting, especially for a large purchase, you need the full picture, right? All the associated fees.
You do. There are other significant costs.
Beyond that core tax, stamp duty or SBT, what are the other major fees we need to factor in? Let's maybe start with withholding tax. That one often sounds complicated.
It can be, mainly because it works differently depending on who's selling.
Okay.
If the seller is a company, it's pretty straightforward. A flat 1% corporate tax withheld from the sale price. Simple.
All right, 1% for companies. What about individuals?
For individuals, it's quite different and honestly more significant. For an individual seller, the withholding tax basically acts like their capital gains tax.
Ah, okay, so that's how capital gains are handled.
Pretty much. And the calculation isn't flat. It's progressive. Crucially, it's tied directly to how long you've owned the property.
Oh, so?
Well, the tax authorities use a specific schedule, a kind of formula, but the practical result is this. The longer you've held the property, the lower the effective rate of withholding tax you end up paying.
Why is that?
Because the way the progressive scale works, the gain is sort of spread over the years of ownership, pushing less of it into higher tax brackets. So if you ignore this withholding tax piece, you're potentially missing a huge chunk of the seller's actual cost.
That's a really important insight. It's not just progressive, it's effectively the capital gains tax mechanism, and it rewards longer ownership.
Precisely. Duration matters again.
Okay. Now, what about the other fees? I often hear about a transfer fee and a registration fee, both sometimes mentioned around 2%. Why two fees that sound similar?
Yeah, that causes confusion. They are distinct, though. The transfer fee is the main one, usually 2% of the appraised value, often that cadastral value again. This is the core government charge for actually transferring the legal ownership title.
Okay, the main cost of the transfer itself.
Right. And that 2% transfer fee, it's often split 50-50 between the buyer and seller. But like everything, that split is definitely negotiable in the contract.
Okay, so transfer fee is the big one, typically 2%, often shared. What's the registration fee then?
The registration fee is also often cited around 2% of the registered value, again, usually tracking the government's value. It's more of an administrative fee specifically for the act of recording the change of ownership on the official title deed, the shenote.
So one fee for the transfer process, one for the recording.
Kind of, yeah. While they both relate to finalizing the transfer and might feel a bit redundant to someone paying them, legally they cover slightly different administrative steps at the land department.
But for budgeting, which one should you focus on?
The transfer fee is generally the more significant and consistently applied statutory cost here. You should definitely budget for that potential 2% hit, typically based on the appraised value.
Good to clarify. Okay, now let's shift slightly. Leases are really common in Thailand, especially for foreigners. How does stamp duty work if you're transferring a lease, not buying freehold?
Good point. Lease transfers have their own rule. Stamp duty applies, but it's at a much, much lower rate, just 0.1%.
0.1%.
Of what?
Of the total rent that's due over the entire length of a lease term.
The whole term. Oh.
Yeah. So say you have a 30-year lease, and the total rent payable over those 30 years adds up to, let's say, 6 million baht.
Okay.
The stamp duty would be 0.1% of that 6 million, which is only THB 6,000.
So quite small compared to the property transfer taxes.
Much smaller, yes. Easy calculation, but also easy to forget to include in the closing costs. And who pays that? Usually it's shared between the person granting the lease lesser and the person getting it, lessee. But again,
Check the contract.
always check the contract. And are there any general exemptions to stamp duty we should know about? Besides the main ones for avoiding SBT.
There are a few specific exemptions, yeah, but they're quite narrow. Inherited properties, for example, might be exempt under certain conditions.
Okay.
Also, for a primary residence, if the combined value of the land and the building is below a certain threshold, and frankly, that threshold is often quite low, there might be an exemption. But these are specific cases.
So the main takeaway regarding ownership duration is really about avoiding that big 3.3% SBT, not necessarily changing the 0.5% stamp duty rate itself, right?
Exactly. The 5 years or 1-year residency primarily determines if you pay 0.5% instead of 3.3%. The 0.5% rate itself doesn't change based on how long you've owned it past that point.
Got it. Now the scary part, what happens if someone, well, doesn't pay these taxes or fees on time?
Yeah, you definitely don't want to go there. The penalties are designed to be a strong deterrent. If you're late paying, but you sort it out before the revenue department starts formal action against you, you could still face a penalty of up to 20% of the tax amount you owe.
20%. Ouch.
And that's not even the worst part. On top of that penalty, there's also a surcharge of 1% per month on the outstanding tax amount.
Per month?
Per month. So these penalties can stack up incredibly fast. Ignoring these obligations doesn't just mean getting deeper into debt. It triggers serious legal issues.
Like what?
It can completely stall any future property transactions you want to make. Trying to sell that house later, trying to buy that beachfront condo in Bangtao you mentioned. Forget it. Until the outstanding tax issues and penalties are fully resolved, it creates a major block.
Okay, so non-compliance is just not an option. It sounds like trying to navigate all this, the stamp duty versus SBT, the withholding tax complexities, the transfer fees, the cadastral values. It feels less like following rules and more like, I don't know, assembling flat pack furniture without the instructions.
Uh-huh. That's a pretty good analogy, actually.
Which is precisely why, especially for significant investments, getting professional help seems, well, non-negotiable.
Absolutely critical. And there are really two key types of professionals you need here. First, you need a good tax advisor.
Okay, what's their role?
Their job is the numbers. They handle the complex calculations, especially that progressive withholding tax for individuals. They ensure your filings are accurate, on time, and they help you identify and properly claim any legitimate exemptions you might be entitled to. They manage the tax compliance side.
Makes sense. And the second professional?
You need a legal consultant, a good property lawyer. Their focus is different. They scrutinize the sale and purchase agreement, the SPA.
Why is that so important?
Because the SPA is where everything gets decided contractually. The lawyer ensures your rights are protected, and critically, that the contract clearly states who is responsible for paying which fee, the stamp duty, the transfer fee split, everything.
Ah, locking down the negotiated responsibilities.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And for complex deals, like high-value luxury properties in Phuket or Samui, having that legal review of the SPA is just paramount. You cannot skip it.
Right, because ultimately, whatever the standard practice is, the contract you sign is the final word on who pays what.
That's the bottom line. Get clarity before you sign.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. What's the main takeaway for someone listening trying to get their head around Thai property taxes?
I think the single biggest financial safeguard for you is truly understanding that difference between the 0.5% stamp duty and the much higher 3.3% specific business tax.
Know which one applies to your situation.
Yes. Always, always check that 5-year ownership rule if you're selling as an individual. Check your residency status, too. Don't just assume you'll get the lower rate.
Yeah.
Verify it based on your specific circumstances.
Solid advice. Don't rely on assumptions. So, okay. What does all this mean, then, when you're actually at the negotiating table?
Well, that's where it gets strategic.
We heard the documents say the seller typically pays stamp duty, but you also said these fees are negotiable.
They are. Everything is technically negotiable in the SPA.
So here's the thought. If you, as the buyer, have done your homework, if you understand the seller's likely tax situation, maybe you suspect they haven't owned it for 5 years, or it's a company selling.
Meaning they're likely facing the 3.3% SBT.
Exactly. And maybe you also have a sense the government's cadastral value is quite high. If you realize the seller might be staring down a massive, perhaps unexpected, 3.3% tax bill calculated on that high value.
That becomes powerful information for you.
Immense leverage, right? You can use your knowledge of their potential tax pain point, that 3.3% pressure, to potentially negotiate a better price for yourself on that dream luxury property in Phuket or Koh Samui.
It's a smart angle. Their tax burden could absolutely be your hidden negotiating tool. Knowledge is power in that negotiation.
Fascinating stuff. Always more layers than you first think.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive into the intricacies of Thai property taxation. Thanks for shedding light on that.
My pleasure. It's crucial information to have.
We'll see you next time.